Hello, in this demonstration I'm going to be explaining to you how to use inlays within ArtCAM Express 2015 R2. Now first of all I want to explain why we actually use the inlay toolpath within ArtCAM. Now the reason being is that when you want to fit two pieces together, you obviously can't have any sharp edges, and I'll just explain to you why you can't actually have that. Okay, so here you can see I've created this polygon, and what you would normally do if you wanted to create a pocket would be to create an area clearance. So if I create an area clearance, let's give this a finished depth, let's say 5mm. I'm going to add a tool, let's say the largest one that I have, just so you can see this. Click select, and I'm just going to calculate this. Okay, so that's calculated the toolpath for me. Now that looks fine as it is. If I simulate this, you can see that it works okay, it doesn't look too bad. But the problem that I have, if I turn on the vectors, just turn off the toolpaths, is if I zoom in, you can see that it's left this little radius on the corner. Now that's just caused by the tool. They can't actually physically create a sharp corner because of the radius of the tool. Okay, so you're always going to leave that radius in there. Now the problem that I'm going to have here is if I take a plan view again, and this time I'm going to create not the pocket, I'm going to create the piece that fits into the pocket, and I'm going to do this using a profile. So I'm just going to cut the part out. Let's do this, let's say 10mm deep. I'll just use the same tool, just set up my material again, make sure that this is 10mm, calculate that, and now if I simulate this to cut that out, I'm just going to go back to the default material just so you can see that it's two pieces of material, and let's just delete the waste material. Let's take a plan view of that. Now you can see that this has given me a perfectly sharp corner. Now if I just open up my folder, I've taken a screenshot here of the pocket. You can see that because of this radius in the corner, this piece is not going to fit into this pocket. So I either have two options. The first one is to put radius corners on each of the male, or I can use the inlay wizard. Now you may not think that that's such a big deal to put radii on the corners here, but when you're doing something with lots and lots of corners, it can get quite confusing. And the good thing about using the inlay wizard within ArtCAM is that it will automatically work all of this out for you and create the radii on the corners for you. Okay, so let's get on with the demonstration. So what I'm going to do is just close this model. I'm not going to save the changes, and I'm just going to show you what I'm actually going to be creating today. So here you can see quite a basic looking sign, but this is all letters that are inlaid within the base of the sign. And I'm going to show you how you can get all of these letters as one piece. Okay, and I'm going to show you how you can create the inlay using this. As you can see, lots and lots of corners on this, so if you were to use the manual method to do this, it would probably take you quite a long time. So I'll just close that and minimize that. Now if you take a look on the right hand side, you can see that I have no modules installed for ArtCAM Express. So everything that you're going to see is done just using the basic ArtCAM Express. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is select new model, and that's going to ask me to set the size for my new model, and I'm going to do this 600 in height and 1.2 meters in width, and I'm going to do this in millimeters. I'll select OK, and this opens up a new model for me. Now I'm going to do this entirely within the 3D view, and I'll show you how you can basically use the 3D view like the 2D view. So if I go to the 3D view, you can see that it's tilted up at an isometric angle. If you just select the view from the top here, you can use it in exactly the same way as the 2D view. Now you'll also notice that we have these rulers on the left and at the top. Now this is new to R2, gives you a representation of where or the size of the actual model or the piece or the part that you're drawing. Now if you want to turn these off, you have two options. You can do that by turning off the toggle vector visibility, but the only trouble with that is that it also turns off your vectors that you may have drawn. Another way to do it, to turn it off permanently, is go to view and then you can select to show or hide the rulers. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is create an ellipse. I can do that using the ellipse tool here. Now I want this to be in the middle and I want to snap from the middle. Another new thing in R2 is that we have something called snap hints. So if you go down to snapping, you can see that we've got something called snap hints. Now what this actually does is if you hover close to somewhere where there's a snap point, it will actually create a circle there. So it basically shows you where the nearest snap point is. Okay, so you can see that it's showing me a circle down the bottom left there, and it's not going to snap there. If I click here, it will still create the ellipse there. Okay, so I'll just delete that. But if I hover over, you can see that the cursor changes. Okay, and it just basically is giving me a guide where the snap point is. So you can see it's picking up the corners, the midpoints. Now I find this really useful to find the center of the model. Before the snap hints, I would be trying to find the center, and it would take a little while to actually find the center. Now I can just hover somewhere near and it gives me a hint of where it's going to be. So I can just select there and I've got the center of the model. Okay, so let's change the width of that. Let's say 1000, height of 500, and then I can select create, and I've got my ellipse. Okay, so I'm now going to create some text. So if I go to the text tool here, this will open up the text tool on the right hand side. If I select where the font is, it will open up a drop down, and this basically will show me all of the fonts available to me, and these are all of the fonts that are installed in my Windows folder. So any fonts that I have installed in Windows will show up in ArtCAM, be it true type fonts or single line fonts. So I'm just going to use the font that I've selected here. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, and let's give it a size, let's say 150. I know that that's going to work okay. Just set the character spacing back to 0. Let's just select on the model. Okay, so I'm going to type in some text. Let's call this Larry Lizards, like so. Now you can see that that's off center. I just need to select to center in the model, and it will center it. I can select all of the text like so, just left clicking and dragging. Now you can see that each font or each character is its separate entity, and I don't really want this for the sake of doing the inlay, because I would have lots of different pockets and lots of different pieces that I would need to fit in. Now sometimes you may want that, but for the purpose of this demonstration I don't really want that. So what I'm going to do is bring it all in. Okay, so they overlap. So what I'm going to do is change the character percentage, and you can see that it starts coming down. Okay, so I want these to all overlap. I think it's going to be probably about -50 where this will basically be okay. Okay, so let's say -50. And when I'm happy with that, I can select create. And I'm just going to center that again, and then if I press Alt on the keyboard and then just move that upwards, it will maintain a 90-degree angle snap. So I'll bring that to about there. Okay, so here you can see my text, and you can see that it's all overlapping. Now to sort that out, so ArtCAM can machine it, I would normally have to trim each part off, and this can be very time consuming. A really nice tool that we have in ArtCAM is the weld tool, and this will basically trim all of that off to each other automatically. So if I select the text, at the moment I can't actually select the weld vectors tool, and the reason being is that this is all grouped together. It needs to be ungrouped. Okay, so if I right click on that and I ungroup vectors, I would need to do that again. That's because if I ungroup a set of text, it will still keep each character as a group. So in theory, there are two groups when you do some text. Now if you want to get out of that really quick, if you just want to ungroup everything, you can select ungroup all, and each piece will be its separate entity. Okay. Now if I select all of this text and then use the weld tool, something will happen that I don't want to happen, and that is that I've lost all of the islands, and that's basically because they're not touching anything. It just automatically assumes that you want to get rid of them. Okay, so what I need to do is undo that and select everything except for the islands. Now what you would normally do would be to select everything and then press shift on the keyboard and deselect the parts that you don't want to select. A nice thing within R2 is that we have a different selection mode, and it's a lot like other CAD systems where you can draw a box, drag to the left, and anything that is within that box will be selected. So I can do that down the bottom here, and this is really useful for this particular piece. So you can see that it's selected exactly what I want to select. So once I've done that, I can now weld the vectors, and you can see that it trims off all of the pieces that I don't want. Okay, so I've got my Larry Lizard's text there. So I'm going to create some more text down the bottom, exactly the same method, just so you can see that again. So create vector text, and let's do this down the bottom here. I'm going to call this Adventureland, like so. Let's center that. Now, as you can see, this is probably a little bit too large, so let's make that, let's say 100, like so. Now if I just zoom in here on the D, you can see that this is not touching. Okay, now if I want to bring that down, let's say bring it down to there, just make it overlap. Okay, and what I'm going to do is just create that. Now if I center that, I can just move that down, like so. Now I need to do exactly the same thing to trim this off, so ungroup all of the vectors, and then I'm just going to select the vectors without the islands, and then just trim all of that using the weld vectors tool. Okay, so that looks okay now, so let's select all of the text, and then I'm going to group that together, just so it's easier for me to select that later. Okay, so I'm ready to actually machine this now. So that's the design part of this done. So if I go to toolpaths, and what I'm going to do is select the text, and I'm going to create an inlay toolpath. I'll just make this a little bit larger so you can see it. Now this opens up the inlay wizard, and it gives you different options for inlay types. So with female we've got 4 different types, and with male we've got 2 different types. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create just a basic pocket and something to fit in there. So let's create a pocket for this. Let me make this a little bit larger so you can see it. And I'm going to give it a finish depth, let's say 10mm. I'm going to choose a finishing tool. Let's use a small tool for this, let's say 3mm. Click select. I'm going to check the option to use a roughing tool. And I'm going to choose the largest one that I have just to blast away the material. And I'm going to set up my material. Now this is going to be quite large, let's say 50mm or 2 inches. Select OK. Now let's just take a plan view of that. Now when I create the toolpath, I know that I'm going to have a problem. Okay, it's going to tell me that the tool's too large to actually get in somewhere. So if I select calculate now, you can see that it's giving me an error message, and it won't actually calculate the toolpath because it's saying that the tool that I'm using is too large to machine either the male or the female. So when you actually calculate this, even though I'm doing the female pocket, it will automatically calculate whether you can do the male insert. Okay, so that's quite useful because I know that I can actually machine the female pocket because I know where the problem is. So if I select OK and then just close that, just zoom in on this S. Now I can see that this is where the problem is, and the problem is caused by this gap here. Now what will happen is if I wanted to create the female pocket, I wouldn't have a problem because the tool would come round and then it would just leave a radius in the corner here. But luckily enough, because ArtCAM automatically works out whether you can do the male insert, it's worked out that because it's left this radius in here, it's not large enough for the tool to get round this area here, and I'd have lots of material left here and it just wouldn't fit. Okay, so it saved me a lot of headache in the future. Now there are 2 ways that I can get around this. First one would be to bring this into the D so then it's all one word and there isn't a gap here, or I can just make it shorter and change the design. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab this node and I'm going to bring that down here, bring that node down there. Let's just rotate this around like so. Let's say there. Let's rotate this around. Let's say about there, like so. So that looks okay. So if I zoom out, you can see that I've just modified this S here. So let's select that again, open up the toolpaths, and I'm just going to edit this toolpath. Just select my tools again, and then calculate now, and this should work. Okay, so that's worked. So if I just zoom in, let's zoom in on this R here. Now what's happening here is that if I were to do a normal area clearance, the tool would follow this shape perfectly and it would create a sharp corner here. But the problem is when I went to do the male, it obviously wouldn't be able to get in here and it would create a radius. So that wouldn't fit when I came to actually fit the parts together. So what ArtCAM's done, it's automatically put the radius on here on the pocket, so it's taken that out for me. Okay, so it's quite useful. Now if I were to do each one of these manually and put fillets on them, it would take me quite a long time to actually do that, so ArtCAM's automatically sorted this out for me. Okay, so let's zoom out. So I'm almost finished with the actual sign base now. So all that I need to do is select the ellipse, and I'm just going to cut the part out. I'm going to do that using a profile toolpath. So this is going to go to the depth, select a profiling tool, choose the 12mm and calculate now. So what I can do is right click and simulate all of the toolpaths. Okay, now if you wanted to, you could trim off the L and the S if you didn't want to come outside here. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm not too bothered about that. This is all waste material. So let's just delete this waste material like so. And you can see that this is the sign base. Okay, so what I need to do now is create the mail, so the insert that will fit into all of this pocket that I have here. And you can see that if I just zoom in, none of the corners are sharp. They all have radii on there. Okay, so if I just zoom out, and let's just delete the simulation, just turn on the vectors again, let's take a plan view, and let's just turn off the toolpaths. If I wanted to, just so I know that it's a different piece, delete the ellipse. And if I was doing this in the real world, I would probably move all of the text down to the bottom corner so I didn't leave any waste material. I'm just going to machine this though, because I'm not really machining this. So let's create another inlay, and let's create a mail straight. Okay, so the finished depth, I want this to be flush with the pocket, so let's do this 10mm. Now an important part of this is the allowance. Now unless you wanted to basically offset the vectors to make them smaller, you can basically put an allowance in here, and this can be a minus figure. So I can put minus 0.1. Okay, this is going to make the whole piece minus 0.1 smaller. Okay, that's quite important, because otherwise it would be size on size, and this piece would have no chance of fitting in that pocket. Okay, so this is going to make it 0.1mm smaller. So select a tool, use the same tool that you used to finish the pocket, so 3mm. Now obviously the thickness of this is not 50mm, so I need to set that up again. I'm going to change that to 10, and then select calculate now. Okay, so that's calculated the toolpath, and I can simulate this toolpath like so. Now if I wanted to, I could actually have the tool showing whilst I simulated. That's another new thing within R2. So if I delete that simulation, right click and choose simulation control bar instead, what happens with this, you get this sort of control bar here, and you also get the tool shown. And if I press play, it basically plays the simulation, and you can see where the tool's actually going. I can fast forward this by pressing here. Okay, so when I'm happy with that, let's delete the waste material, and you can see that that is my insert. And none of these corners, normally they would have sharp edges, but here you can see they all have radii on the corner, and they're all going to fit into the pocket fine. Okay, so this saves you a lot of headache in the long run. Okay, so to actually send this to your machine, what you need to do is go to toolpaths, and then go to save toolpaths. The mail insert, I'll just move that over onto the left for the time being, so that's in this section here. These are the toolpaths that I'm going to save. These are all for the pocket, for the base. You can save toolpaths to separate files, so each one goes to a separate file. It's useful if you've got a single headed machine. I can append the toolpath details to the file names, so all of this data will be in the file name, so I know what's what. I can choose where to save it. I'll just use the default folder that I've got here. Now we have the machine file format. Now this is really important. It's basically a converter from ArtCAM, converts the toolpath data into data or language that your machine, your CNC machine or laser, will understand. Okay, and it basically tells it where to go and how to machine it. Now, in this list we have well over 200 post processors for all sorts of machines, and this is all available within the basic ArtCAM Express. Okay, now if you're unsure whether your machine is actually supported, then I strongly recommend that you download the trial or the demo version, go through the tutorials, and then at the end you can actually machine it and you can use one of these posts, and you can just make sure that it works okay for your machine. Right, so what I'm going to use is, let's say, an iCarver machine. Select save, let's open up my folder, and you can see that I've got these 3 toolpaths. And these are basically just text. Okay, these are NC files. If I double click on that, Windows is just asking me what I would like to open this with. Let's just open it with WordPad because it's just text. Okay, and here you can see it's just what we call G code, so G code commands, and then there are coordinates, so it's telling it where to go in X, Y, and Z. And it's basically just telling the machine what to do in order to machine it. So that brings an end to the demonstration. I hope that you found it useful and gained some insights into doing basic inlays within ArtCAM Express.